This is Paul Slatkis. We're going to talk about a serious, very serious subject, and we're going to talk about a Good Samaritan. That's what I'm going to call you right here. Former director, Center for Advanced Lung Disease and Lung Transplant. That's the big word here. Program at Stanford, Stanford Hospital, is it, or Stanford University Hospital?
Stanford University Medical Center. Yep.
There you go. Author and consultant for transplant care. Wrote a book called Exhale. Dr. Weil, hi, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
I'm very interested. You know, you talk so much nice things here, positive, and I'll have to say not positive, I guess, or it depends. Maybe it's all positive. If somebody, well, what is a transplant? Let's start with that.
Transplant, really the replacement of diseased organs. So there's four big ones: there's heart, lung, kidney, and liver. I tended to focus more on the lung side and a little bit on the heart side, but mainly on the lung side.
Okay. And so man slash woman is created with, is it two lungs?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm pretty warm so far here.
Yes.
All right. So you have two lungs, and do you need both of them?
No, early on in my career, especially, we often did single lung transplants, but as time progressed during the course of my, 3 decades in the field, we ended up transplanting a double lung transplant, I would say in 90% of the cases. So that became much more common.
And you did a double transplant because they both were not good?
Yeah, both lungs are often diseased and sometimes infected, so you want to get all the infected lung tissue out and replace them with new lungs.
So I'm going to ask you, how do you do that?
Well, so the operation itself is a 6 to 8 hour period during the whole cycle of a transplant patient, but it begins at the time of diagnosis, and then there's a recipient evaluation process, there's a waiting list time, and then after the operation, the patient then goes on to live for many years afterwards. And so the surgery is important, but a relatively discrete part of all of it.
Discrete part. Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds to me like the major part,
Yeah.
but I understand the other parts. And we're going to talk about the other parts because you wrote a book about the other parts.
Right.
And your passion and empathy and your kindness about those. In other words, if I understand this right, so God forbid, I'll even say, I need a set of lungs. My lungs, I was a heavy smoker. I wasn't, but I was. And it seems to be, that seems to be one of the top reasons for lung. You can tell me yes or tell me no, but I'm just making this scenario. And
Yeah.
now I've realized you tell me I have lung cancer. Is that what you tell me?
No, we don't transplant, generally speaking, people with lung cancer of the common types, that are smoking related. In fact, most of the patients we transplant have what I call just bad luck diseases. They have diseases like pulmonary fibrosis that you just get for no particular reason, or they inherit a lung disease like cystic fibrosis, and a large majority of our patients have one of those two diseases. Relatively few smoking related emphysema cases, and essentially no lung cancer cases.
Wow. Okay. When you said hereditary, so are you able to early on know that someone's going to potentially be a candidate for lung cancer?
Well, we know that cystic fibrosis, which is an inherited disease, a genetic disease due to a mutation, we know that those patients, many will go on to respiratory failure and quite often require a lung transplant. So you know that pretty much at birth. Cystic fibrosis patients, thankfully, are living longer and longer due to the medication that's available now. So they see us in the transplant arena later in life, say in their 30s or even 40s.
So the book here, I love this. The incredible stories and very real people that inspired this book. All right, share some of that. Share some of the good news with us. We love people that are inspirational.
Yeah, what was great about my field and what attracted me to it initially was the relationships that I developed, often with young people that we transplanted. In a way, these young people with cystic fibrosis especially became, my children and they were very important to me. Their families were very important to me. And so I write about in the book some of the relationships that developed. And when we're able to save those folks' lives, that's obviously very powerful. And we get to really share in the success of the family and their patient, with weddings and birthdays and having their own kids. But then when things don't go so well, it can be devastating because I, for one, got very close to the patients that I treated. And when the transplant didn't work or there were complications and the patient passed away, as I write about in the book, it was pretty tough on me.
Imagine so. Um, okay, can you share an example? I don't know whether you included,
Yeah,
names
I,
are
I, I
probably
can.
not that important.
No, I can. There was a patient actually that I call Tina in the book. That's not her real name, but she was my kindred spirit. She was a 25-year-old young woman who was full of life. We transplanted her. She did great. She went out and climbed mountains, jumped out of airplanes, did anything that she wanted to do. But it was her personality that attracted me the most. She would call me by my first name, which not all of my patients did. In fact, none of them did except her. And I would find her in the clinic room with her feet up on the desk, looking at the laboratory results in the computer, which violated, many hospital policies. But that's who she was. She had a bit of a salty mouth as well, which I write about in the book. Um, and we eventually had to or at least try to do a retransplantation, a second transplant operation on her. And losing her was a real turning point for me because I was so close to her. And quite honestly, it felt like that I had failed her. And, that's not particularly rational for a doctor, to feel, but that's how I felt. And these are kind of the crushing moments, the real emotional moments that I talk about in the book.
So let's take a second, if you don't mind, to talk about that. So what did you actually? I'm a whatever. I listen to. I'm an interfaith, whole faith minister, spiritual or so on guy, and just in general, I'm compassionate to my brothers and sisters. What you and I will say, you look like Matthew McConaughey. And you almost sound like him. Uh,
It must be the Southern accent.
I don't know. You got the looks too. So yeah, there you go. In any case, so how do you then deal with? Because this is like talking to somebody who deals with death, right?
And I talk about this in a lot of the book about how to avoid this empathy depletion that some of us in the healthcare field experience, especially with COVID now. There's a lot of that going on. And I think the key is to stay connected to your family, your friends, and to your faith. And I think that that's extremely important. There were times that I did that well during my career, and then times when I did not do that well. And the times that I struggled the most is when I isolated myself from the people I worked with, from my friends, and even from my own family. And much of the time period that I write about in the book, I had two young daughters of my own and a wife as well. And, they probably didn't get the full me most of the time because my mind was elsewhere thinking about the patient group we cared for.
So do you, if you don't mind me asking, did you seek, speaking to somebody to help you? Are there real pros out there? I would think so. That
I
help.
did. Yeah, I talk about this pretty clearly in the book that it got to the point where I needed, a third party,
Yeah.
somebody that didn't know me, that I could talk to, that had professional experience talking to people that had reached this stage. And I talked to a therapist for a few years and met with her every week while I was in California and really enjoyed it and thought I got a lot out of it. I'm somebody that likes to go to the gym and exercise frequently. And to me, it felt very much like that. I was just working on my brain instead of, my body. And I'm a big proponent of therapy. In fact, when I go out and talk to medical centers across the country about the book, I talk about, the fact that we should destigmatize, therapy. It's to me a very normal part of being human.
Yeah, I also agree. I think therapy is very helpful. For others, and it's depending on, of course, the therapist, but let's say the therapist is good and doesn't know a lot of your baggage. Uh, and and there's some assets to that, like how many times can I call my buddy in California or call my sister? Eventually they're starting to say, "You again? No, this again." I thought
Right.
I said to you, don't. I said, well, yeah. So and hopefully they have the emotion, but also hopefully in essence, they come in with no emotion. They just meeting you, they're hearing your tale, and hopefully they have had others with similarities. Would you say?
Absolutely. And the therapist that I talked to in California actually wrote a book called Speed.
Okay.
And the thesis of her book was that there's a speed addiction out there, and not to the drug speed, but to going fast. And she treated a lot of folks like myself that were professionally very driven and went to work, whether it be in the tech industry or in medicine or law or whatever, but all had similar characteristics. So she was used to talking with people like me and sort of questioning our belief system a little bit. But I can't recommend the book enough. It's an important piece of medical evidence, I think.
Okay, that's good to know. And it's nice of you to recommend her book as well as. So her book is called Speed, and your book is called Exhale.
Yeah.
So why exhale?
Well, I think when you've lived a life that's full of speed, at some point you have to exhale. And I wanted to call the book that because it follows the full arc of my career, the growth phase of my career, the period in which I think I was wound pretty tightly into it, and then the period that I felt like I needed to reinvent myself and step back a little bit and reassess, and that's the exhale part.
Uh-huh. So you're a yogi.
That's right. That's right. In my own way.
All right. Well, exhale is they call it in yoga the pranayama. It's all about the breath.
That's right.
And that's sort of like what life is about. When you do surgery, or when you do, it's when you are you still doing surgery?
No, no, I've left the front lines of the hospital now 5 years ago.
So when you did surgery, did you find yourself breathing or not breathing, exhaling, inhaling, or is it such a frenetic scenario that you don't get a chance?
Yeah, not much. I mean, and I find that actually, in my present day life, we tend to hold our breath a lot. As a lung doctor, I'm very interested in breath and respiration, and we tend to hold our breath a lot, and that actually triggers in our brain that something's wrong when we do that. That it's called a sympathetic response. It's the fight or flight response, and when we exhale, the opposite occurs. Our body is told to relax, and I think that that's what's very interesting about. There's many things interesting about the respiratory system, but one is how it triggers these signals in our own brain about what's coming.
Uh-huh. So my yogi, actually, I'm a certified yoga instructor. I might not look it, but I am. And Claire Diab, Deepak Chopra's yogi for the last 25 years. She tells us tongue at fire point, to keep your tongue behind their upper teeth.
Yeah.
That is a good position, actually, she thinks, during the day, like, unless you're eating or maybe talking. But her whole emphasis on yoga was really built around the breath. She said it's not how she would never say how far you could stretch. You hate the word stretch. How far you can move your body. It would be how deep you can breathe. Do you think
Yeah.
about that? What do you
No,
think?
I do quite a bit, and I think that's right. Actually, for us to be able to take those nice full deep breaths is really important, mainly because of what I know about what it signals your brain to do, which I think is critical. I think many of us, perhaps you as well, feel like we have this fight or flight response all the time when we're working, and that's obviously not sustainable. It's not sustainable for soldiers. It's not sustainable for people that aren't getting shot at. It's not a good way to live.
Well, let me ask you. I actually spent 2 years of my life. I did the Brain series on PBS many,
Yeah.
many years ago, the first one. Okay, so what does the air oxidation? What does that do to your brain, or doesn't do to your brain?
Do you mean poor oxygenation?
Yeah, I guess you said you know what that really does to your brain.
Oh, well, there's all kind of signals that we have that lead to a secretion of a drug, a chemical in our body called cortisol, which you're probably familiar with. And cortisol is the fight or flight drug. So when we're getting chased, a long time ago out in the jungle, it was cortisol that made us run faster and be stronger. And one issue in the workplace right now in a number of fields, and I've been with the promotion of this book talking to stock traders, people in the legal profession, medical field, airline pilots, you name it, all these high stress fields. And what happens is that if you have a chronic cortisol hyper alert state, your body actually, that's not only bad for you emotionally, it actually can cause physical effects in your body that can be long lasting. And so we've got to have periods in our life where we bring the cortisol levels down. And that's something that came to me much later in life than I would have liked it to, but I'm a real believer in that now.
I think I just watched and I've been wondering about it, a whole presentation on cortisol. One of those 15-minute ones that you can't get out of, and they're going to sell you something at the end of it. And I think it was fascinating. And I guess the question is with cortisol, I know this isn't a cortisol, it's a sex story. Can you lower or increase? Did you end up able to buy something? Was I end up able to buy a tablet or not?
I wouldn't buy anything that purports to be able to lower cortisol levels. I think you have to do it in a number of ways. You have to have adequate sleep, you have to exercise regularly, meditation if that's your thing, yoga. You have to also be sure you're taking slow, deep breaths as opposed to shallow, frequent breaths. All of those things have been shown to lower cortisol level. I am not aware of a drug that can lower cortisol levels.
Why? I'm going to ask you a few more questions, then I'm going to let you go and go into some yoga posture. So why are you a doctor? Why were you? How did you become a doctor and not Matthew McConaughey acting in Los Angeles?
I um, I got exposed to medicine early on. I was raised by a physician and a nurse, and wanted to be a doctor my whole life. I worked in the hospitals in high school and college. I was a real medical geek. And I found transplant quite by accident early on in my medical career. And when I found it, it was love at first sight. And I knew that it was for me. It was just a matter of which organ I was going to transplant, and it turned out to be the lung.
I got to ask you, how did you find it out?
Well,
If you don't
so
mind.
no, the first day of my internship, which is about 2 weeks out of medical school, so you actually know nothing, I show up for my internship, and somebody on the kidney transplant service who was about 5 years ahead of me, much more experienced as a young doctor, got sick and couldn't be on the kidney transplant service. So they needed somebody to do all the menial tasks on the kidney transplant service, and they wanted one of us interns to volunteer. So 2 hours into my internship, I shot my hand up and I was hired. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me. We did a transplant the first night I was on call. I saw a man make urine for the first time in 3 decades after his kidney transplant. I was hooked. That was all it took.
All right. You're a good man, good Samaritan, thank God. And thank you for writing your book, Exhale. One last question, well, two last questions. What do you want people to learn from your book?
I think that a couple things. One would be that work life balance, start developing that habit from a young age. I think that it's critical. I know there's tons of discussion about that now, but I can't emphasize that enough. I also think that we all have the ability to reinvent ourselves, to try a new path. That nothing is permanent in our life. If something's not working, we can always change the channel. And I think that those are important messages that I'm trying to get across.
We're involved with the Internet. Thank you for those good thoughts there. We're involved with the International Day of Peace, World Peace Day, September 21st. We have been for almost 20 years. in the hopes of just promoting the good in the world, of which we're very much on the positive side, that most of the majority, and not almost everybody, except for the ones that sometimes are confused and will hurt you, are into the world of peace. And so I've asked many people for them personally, what does peace mean to them? So, Dr. Weil, what's peace mean to you?
Surrounded by my family and friends, that I've had a great blessing to have. And I think that the times that I'm most at peace are when my family and friends are around me and staying connected to them. I think isolation is the enemy.
You got it, brother. All right. Thanks so much, my friend.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.